Okay, we can, people are still kind of rolling in slowly. We had 48 people register, but I think, Chris, did you want to say a few words at the top before we get started?
Absolutely. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time out and for coming out, especially to the members of the public who have come out too. It's great to see everybody here. We just want to reiterate that this portion of our work in our last phase here is going to be some of the most important work that we'll do as the People's Maps Commission. And how you guys are participating today will be how we will move forward, ultimately trying to get some of your ideas of where those lines fall, as well as those communities of interest that we will continue to ask for on our website. And so we're looking very much forward to Liz and to Moon for helping put this together tonight, and also to kind of put pen to paper and try to see how we can further draw those maps in a sophisticated way. So thank you very much, and we look forward to it. I'll turn it over to you, Liz.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to pass it quickly to Heather, the geographer at our lab, who will be doing a lot of reviewing and looking at all the community maps that are submitted, to say a few words about the lab.
Sure. Right now, the main thing that I would like to say is to request that all of you start thinking right now, if you haven't started thinking already, about a community that is important to you in terms of districting. You don't have to have a huge description by the end of the day today, but I'm going to be leading an exercise that'll be guiding you through mapping that community on Districtr. And depending on your comfort level, you can watch the demonstration completely, but I'm hoping that at least some folks will take the plunge and follow along and be mapping along. So start thinking about a community that is important to you.
Cool. And then for the folks who I haven't met yet, my name is Liz. I work at the lab as a program administrator, and I'm going to kick it off with a short presentation before we get into mapping. So let me share my screen.
While Liz is getting that set up, Claudia and Kat, if you could just wave so everyone can see you. Claudia and Kat are some wonderful students who have been working with us for, 6 months to several years, I think, and who will be helping out answering questions in the chat. So feel free to, please see them as knowledgeable folks.
Can everyone see the presentation? Thumbs up. Okay, that's great. Okay, so this is a workshop about communities and communities of interest. And we're gonna be focusing on introducing the concept and how you can map them in our free public mapping tool, Districtr. So I will run through a short presentation, and then, like Heather said, I'll pass it to her, who will lead us through a mapping exercise in Districtr, and then we'll use the last 10 minutes or so to wrap up and answer questions. Most folks who registered for tonight said their main goal was to learn what a community of interest is. So we're going to focus on that and some of the basic features in Districtr. And if at the end you still have questions, you want more practice, the lab hosts workshops every Wednesday evening and study halls on Thursday afternoons. We're going to be doing that throughout May. And so these are both opportunities to work in small groups, ask questions, get comfortable with Districtr, start and even possibly submit a map as testimony to the commission. So if you have any questions as we go, feel free to drop them into the chat and we will try to answer them. Kat and Claudia will be on top of it. Okay, so very quickly, who draws the lines? In Wisconsin, of course, the state legislature draws the lines, but the People's Maps Commission will be drawing proposed district plans for Congress, the state Senate, and the state assembly. I borrowed this lovely graphic from their website. So the commission is balancing and juggling a lot of different criteria. Some of the criteria is required because of federal and state law, but other criteria is, best practices. And so we're focusing today on communities of interest, or COIs. And this is a term that has a legal definition. The definition varies from state to state, but it's one of the ways that communities are recognized in the redistricting process and by the courts. And this can be especially helpful for folks who have kind of, been left out of the political process. Heather, please feel free to jump in at any point if you want to add anything on the slides. Okay, so what is a community of interest? The definition that we use in our group is it's a group with significant shared interest that should be given careful consideration by the line drawers. So after some brainstorming, we thought maybe some of these groups in Wisconsin could be small family dairy farmers, Milwaukee residents concerned about stormwater runoff in Lake Michigan, commuters in Madison who rely on the same bus system. And it can be as small as one neighborhood or as big as a few counties. And they can be rural, urban, suburban. They can really encompass any geography. So you can think about COIs as a way for a community to tell their story and to talk about the things that they have in common, how that might be different from other communities in the area. And community members can define these areas with personal stories or by describing some of their concerns. So we have a couple of prompts or interview questions that we use to really dig into this, which we will get into later. But the COIs we think should be based on, some local knowledge of the area and be defined by community members or people who are familiar with the community.
Just to quickly build on this slide, the phrase significant shared interest that should be given careful consideration by the line drawers. That usually means that the community of interest is a group of people who should be all kept in one district. In some cases, though, that means that if it's a bigger community, maybe it means that the community should be split into two districts so their votes aren't cracked and packed. And so the idea is giving communities a voice. And so that's what that phrase given careful consideration means. Usually kept together for bigger communities, sometimes divided thoughtfully into two districts.
Yeah, that's a really good point and clarification. So public mapping is kind of where we're asking folks to get involved in what we're asking people to do in Districtr. And so this example in Lowell, Massachusetts speaks to some of the importance of hearing directly from people with local knowledge. So Lowell is a small city in Massachusetts, and they recently drew districts for the first time. This image on the left is an official neighborhood map from the city of Lowell. And this image on the right is a community map, which we actually gathered through an interview with a couple of Lowell residents. And so I will just point out some of the differences really quickly. The Highlands, which is this purple area, even just kind of by eyeballing quickly, you can see has a different shape. Same with many of the other neighborhoods. Lower Highlands, for example, in this kind of light green, takes a different shape and different area on the community drawn map. And the other area that I will highlight that doesn't appear on this official neighborhood map is this yellow zone here, which is the UMass Lowell student zone. And so if you're mapping and thinking about communities, it's important to remember that the boundaries from the community members might be different than what you can find in official sources. And the people who live in communities are probably the best source for that information. The UMass Lowell Student Zone is also a good example because it touches on some of the shared interests that the community might share that are different from some of the other areas. For example, a lot of students might have, be thinking about short-term rentals as opposed to other people in Lowell. But it's with tools like Districtr and some of the other free public mapping softwares that you can kind of show what areas you are talking about when you describe your community. So I will just quickly go over some of the interface that you'll see if you go to Districtr. So this is a screenshot of our Wisconsin State landing page. And so if you are interested in drawing districts, you'll follow the purple path and click on one of these cards that will let you draw the boundaries that your elected officials will represent. And then if you toggle over from the purple side to the red side, that's where we'll be focusing, and that's where you'll be drawing communities of interest. And mapping on this side is, you're not mapping the district boundaries, but you're thinking about where communities live, you're thinking about shared stories and common interests. And then once you have this information, you can think about how it fits into the pieces of a district plan. So I will go over some of our prompts that we use to talk about and think about communities of interest before passing it off to Heather. But some of the prompts that we use for collecting COI narratives are to ask, who is part of your community? Where do they live? What do they have in common? This can be common employers, common languages spoken. You might ask about important places, important places of worship, community centers, and you might ask what issues need attention from officials, what projects need resources devoted to them. And then you might ask, what might a community meeting be about? And so these are just different ways of trying to dig into that community story and talk about shared concerns.
Liz, can we spend a few minutes with this slide actually to start developing a few community narratives and get a flavor for the kinds of things that we're trying to build?
Definitely.
Is that okay?
Awesome.
Yeah,
I'm super, please, yes.
All right, yeah, so if folks can, if you're a pen and paper kind of person, get your pen and paper ready. If you're a typing kind of person, get your Google Doc or Word or whatever it is that you prefer to type in. And let's take a few minutes and go through these questions. You don't have to have answers to all of them, but try to get answers to at least two that you feel passionate about. So who is part of your community? Where do they live? What do they have in common? And where do they live? You can think pretty broadly about this for now, because soon we'll get to some actual maps and you'll be drawing that. So you don't need to have a latitude, longitude or anything. So take a few seconds and write some ideas down. What are some important places for your community? These can be commercial areas, places of worship, community centers, significant employers. I'll also add cultural centers to that. And then moving on, what issues need attention from officials, or what community projects need resources? And these can be things like social services. These can be things like environmental services, parks and environmental issues, These can be things like transportation, public transportation, infrastructure, things like housing, things like shared environmental risks. And then if your community has had a meeting recently, what was it about? And recently, let's just say, because we're in the ridiculous pandemic times, in the last year. And if your community hasn't had a meeting, what would people come together about? And I'd like to ask folks to start putting some answers to any of these questions in the chat. Lake Mills, so that's a place where people live. Bayview neighborhood, getting outdoors, a neighborhood association. Lakes, rivers, states, county parks, important cities. Yeah, let's hear from at least 2 more. School sports events, yeah, absolutely. Racial unity, city development, water quality, natural resource management. Yeah, awesome. A school district as a community, absolutely. These are all great, and I am excited as a geographer and community mapper and former Madisonian to see all of these on maps. Liz, I'll turn it back over to you for the last bit of your slides.
Sure. I have one more slide to go. This is a little bit about the do's and don'ts of the COI narrative. And so that is just to say that COIs shouldn't be exclusively defined by race or political party, even though these can be, of course, important identities. But something, for example, that you wouldn't want to submit as a community of interest is to say that your community is, you know, a blue area in a sea of red, that type of thing. So you can steer the conversation away from that by asking some of these prompts that we suggest, but maybe if you are running your own interviews, you might come up with your own kind of strategy for navigating that. But something that you might ask is, how is this shared identity reflected in resource needs? Are there frequent protests here? Where do they meet? What are they about? Do people tend to have the same kinds of jobs or employment needs? And then this last one is important for articulating and getting at some of those shared concerns, which is, what would you like your representative to do for your neighborhood? So those are just some of our suggestions. With that, Heather, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it to you.
Sure. I'm going to also do a screen share to guide folks through mapping those community ideas on Districtr. However, before that, let's take questions if there are any at this point. So feel free to type questions in the chat and we can take a few minutes to talk through them. how do we find out about workshops? Great question. We will paste the link into the chat at the end, but let's also paste it now. Kat, can you grab, or Kat or anyone, Kat, I just saw you first. Can you paste the link to the workshop sign up in the chat? Will we be creating an account in Districtr? No, it is completely public. You don't need to create an account or anything. There are ways to save your map, and I'll demonstrate that, but you do not need to sign up, create an account or anything. How to get other people involved from your various communities. That is a huge and extremely important question. And so we'll spend some time at the end talking about that. Would income ranges be considered communities of interest? I would say that that could be considered the start of a community of interest, but you'd want to think about what those income ranges mean in terms of what are the common concerns. Are the income ranges associated with a certain kind of work? Does everyone work in retail in that area and that's associated with a certain income level? Does everyone work for Epic outside of Madison and that's associated with a certain other income level? And what are the common interests? So I would say it's a start, but then you'd want to start developing that more. Liz, do you want to add to that?
I actually think your explanation covered it really well. It can be another, like having good data points about income can help build your community narrative. So you can definitely include that information, but I agree that it's a good point to raise.
All right, so let's get into mapping. All right, can everyone see a screen that has a big blue Districtr icon at the top? Can I ask folks to use the react button? I don't really care which reaction you do, if it's a celebration react or a thumbs up or what, but just to get a sense of if folks we're on the same page. Awesome. Okay, so we are seeing this is the Districtr homepage. I am going to scroll down to the map. You can also click, scroll back up and click jump to the map to get here. And I'll click on Wisconsin. As Liz had mentioned, you can draw districts. And so we're not going to talk about that except for mentioning it. If you want to draw district plans and suggest whole districting plans or partial districting plans, that's where you would use these. But we'll be focusing on communities. And yes, Benjamin, if you are up for it, please do follow along on your own devices. And we're going to take our time through this, so that should give enough time for you to do the screen back and forth as necessary. But that's also why this is being recorded, so you can look back at it. With that, I'm going to click on Draw Communities. And I'll ask for another reaction. Can folks who are up for following along react when you are at the same screen? Awesome. So I am going to click on building a community out of 2020 wards. And for folks who are redistricting nerds, wards are the same as precincts for Wisconsin, so you'll probably hear people using the term synonymously. All right, so if you're following along, please click on those 2020 wards. And so first, I'm going to take a minute and just introduce you to a few of the basic tools before we start mapping. And please, again, follow along with these tools. So you'll probably, this map probably looks a little bit familiar to you if you've used something like Google Maps or Apple Maps or OpenStreetMap, because it's a similar base map where you can drag around. And so all I'm doing now is clicking and dragging to pan. If I'm using a different tool, I can click back on this button with the hand to click around and click and hold and pan. To zoom in and out, I can use this plus button to zoom in, the minus button to zoom out. I can also, I'm going to do the same thing, but with a scroll wheel on my mouse. And if you have a trackpad, you can do the same zoom in, zoom out. You can also type in specific places to zoom into them right away. So rather than, let's say, putting my mouse over Fond du Lac, I can type in Fond du Lac. So I will do that. And you see that it comes up along with a few other options. And then you zoom in. And so what I'm going to ask folks to do now is for folks who are following along, go ahead and zoom into your area. And I'm actually going to go and zoom to Madison. Liz and I both have Badger roots. I think, Liz, you did your undergrad, was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
At Wisconsin, and I finished a PhD out of there right before the pandemic. So we're going to zoom to Madison for now. All right. And can I ask folks to, again, react if you have gotten to a place that you might want to map on Districtr? So you've either typed in a place or zoomed in. Awesome. I am seeing a few reactions. David Stanfield, you are lost. Can you either type in your question or unmute and say your question? Let's try to get you unlost.
This is Chip from Manitowoc. You asked us to go ahead and go to an area of interest.
Yeah.
And then you also followed that up by saying, let's all go to Madison. So I'm here with you in Madison, but I'm not able to do what you asked, which was be in Madison and go to Manitowoc.
Yeah, go to your area of interest. I'm typing in Madison for purposes of going somewhere in the demonstration side, but go to the area that you were writing about earlier. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Uh-huh.
David, you can see the map but cannot touch or affect it. So let's start by, if you type in that upper left corner, a place that you want to zoom to. And I will just type in, let's see, I will type in Ashland. And we'll go to way up north. And so that's one of the things that you can do to touch the map and move around the map. You can also click and drag, which is what I'm doing now.
I guess I'm not in the program. I'm not in the software. I can just see it moving around, but somehow or other I didn't get in.
All right, so I'll introduce navigating to Districtr again at the end. I'll just loop back through it. But for now, let's just, if you can't get to it, let's just follow along and take notes if that helps you. Definitely take notes on your community. Jack, thank you also for posting the link to the YouTube page where this will be available to rewatch. So let's get to know some of the tools on Districtr. So one of these is the paintbrush tool, and I'm going to paint some things that completely don't make sense just to show you how it works for now. So this tool that hopefully looks a little like a paintbrush is how you paint communities. And so my community doesn't look like this giant line across Wisconsin, but that's how you click and hold and drag across your wards and it'll color them in. If you want to add another community, again, it's not going to look like this at all. You can click and hold and drag across after clicking this plus button to add this other community. If you make a mistake, you can click the undo button. You can also click the redo button. You can also use the eraser. And so again, click and, or just click on the areas that you want to erase, or click and drag to erase more. So let's erase everything and then go to mapping and describing a community. All right, so I am navigating screens right now. So in the drawing area, we're going to identify areas of interest. So those are our communities of interest, and then important places that help flesh out that narrative. And so I'm going to map, again, think of your community right now. I'm going to map the graduate student community associated with the University of Wisconsin, Madison. So I am going to zoom into Madison, and I will add the pieces of the university. And so you click on this button for new, and then you click wherever you want to place a point. You can zoom in way more. I'm just using the scroll button right now. And I'm going to put an important place here, and just call that the University of Wisconsin. And I'm going to write in a description. It's where a lot of undergrads go and a lot of grad students go, both as students and as workers. And so take a minute, think about one of those important places that you wrote down earlier, and use that important places tool to put it on your map. Again, not on Madison unless you're also mapping Madison, but click on this important places tool, place a point on the map, and then add a description to the place name, and then add a name to the place name. Add a description of what makes it important and to who. If you make a mistake, there's this big trash button right next to place name. And so I'm going to delete the University of Wisconsin, just for the sake of showing that you can delete them and re-add them. So now it's off of the map, and now I'll click again, and I'm going to place it slightly differently this time. And can I ask folks to, again, react if you were able to put an important place down?
We're done whenever you're done.
Awesome. All right, so let's go and color in an area. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'll just use the minus button for this to mix things up. And here's where things can start to look a little weird, because you're going to be coloring in wards. And I'm going to, actually, I will go back to my community 1 because I had added a community 2 in, but I'll start with community 1. I'm going to color in the areas where a lot of grad students tend to live. And this isn't going to be perfect. I haven't lived there for 5 years-ish now. But actually, I'm going to erase it now because I meant to color the first one. All right, So clicking on the first button, I'm going to color in some polygons. And if you feel like you're coloring in too much and not getting the detail you want, you can make the brush smaller. So that way I can only color in with the size 1, I can color in 1 at a time. And if you are doing a larger area, here I'll zoom out and make something ridiculous looking again. You can make the brush much larger and color in larger areas. And for folks who were talking about mapping by watersheds and mapping by environmental features, a large area, a large brush size might be helpful for you. Another thing you can do is show county boundaries. And actually I'll add in those bells and whistles of the data layers after we finish drawing. So take another minute and draw your community. So color in the building blocks that you think best describe your best match where the people in your community live. And if folks could again react once you've gotten through that step. All right, I will give it another minute.
Well, people are working on painting community areas. It might be important just to mention that sometimes the wards or block groups and the units that you're using might not perfectly capture every boundary that you want. So we always recommend leaning on the side of being inclusive and including more than you need. And then the description or placing a landmark is a great way to mark an important boundary, like an important road or river or something that isn't necessarily captured in the shape of the units that we're using.
Yeah, that is a great point. And a great segue to the name and community description. So thanks, Liz. All right, so I'm going to call this University of Wisconsin-Madison grad student community. And here I'm going to just restate some of those questions from that slide that Liz had up to help folks develop your narrative. So first, write in a name for your community. Based on a lot of the ideas that folks put in the chat would be find names for communities. It can be an official name of a region, a town, a neighborhood, or it can be a name that you think just describes the area. You want to avoid names that are kind of hyper personal. Like you don't want to say like where I grew up. You want to say something that is more broadly applicable, something more community oriented, more group oriented. And then in terms of the description, I'll just restate a few of those questions. So what are some important gathering places for your community and what brings people together? What are some shared cultural characteristics that unite your community? What are some work-related characteristics that unite your community? Work or major sources of employment. Those can also be those economic characteristics, those income-related characteristics that folks asked about. How is the physical environment significant to your community? Are there common risks, common environmental issues or needs? And then what are some concerns that unite your community? What are some common needs? And try to answer, again, at least one of these questions in this description field. And so I'll talk about description of UW grad students again, as I was one of them a few years ago, but my description is going to be a little bit out of date, so I'm not submitting this map. So grad students had common needs of things like affordable housing, as many of us were working at the same time. Public transit was really important and was really well provided for the most part in a lot of Madison, but was still an important need. Education was also really important. And so these kinds of things you'll want to put in your description field. So take a minute and do that. Can I again get folks to react when you've entered in a description for your community? All right, so please keep going. Benjamin, just to put you on the spot, can you share the description that you wrote?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I have Bayview is a neighborhood on the south side of Milwaukee. It borders St. Francis. It's in its own, has its own sense of community with many young people and new parents. Folks in Bayview are generally progressive, but the area has a working class history. People in the community like the outdoors, shopping local, and supporting one another.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I'll do another call for reacts of if you finished or at least started adding a community name and description. Maybe a few folks had time to finish up. All right, well, I'll demonstrate again now some of these additional features and bells and whistles that can help you in better understanding your community, better understanding the area. And you'll have this resource afterwards, and you'll have our workshops afterwards to keep mapping. So I'm going to just zoom back into the Madison. Actually, I'll zoom into the Milwaukee area for now, just to mix things up. So we've been in the drawing tab. You can also go to the data layers tab to see a lot more about what the area is like, largely using census data. You can show or not show your communities. And so if I click the show your communities button and turn that off, then it'll make it so that you're not seeing them. You can show the numbers for them. And so this is our first community. If you map many communities on the same map, then they'll number sequentially. You can also turn county boundaries on and off. I'm going to turn county boundaries back off for now, and I'm going to show unified school districts, which sometimes take a minute to show up. So I will, in the interest of time, just keep going because I think that the screen share is a little overwhelming my computer. And I'll add that you can also show tribal nations in Wisconsin. And so especially if you zoom out to the whole state, you can start to see some of the tribe names and areas. You can look at demographic information. So you can show the total population of Wisconsin, just shaded. You can also show specific races or ethnicities. So if you want to see the Hispanic population in Wisconsin, and here I'll just zoom back into Milwaukee so we can see more contrast. And you can compare that to the Black population in Wisconsin. I will zoom back out to show Indigenous American and Alaska Native population because that will correspond with a lot of the tribal nations. And so you can see where people with different demographics tend to be. You can also look a little bit at partisan lean based on some 2018 back through 2012 election results, and I will show the whole state for that. And I will hide my communities So if you want to get a sense of what the state looks like in terms of how people voted for, this is the 2018 governor election, the 2016 Senate election, and so on. And then in the evaluation tab, you can compare your community's population to the demographics of the whole state. And so here you can see that the area that I colored in for UW grad students, which I think was part of that east side of Madison, and then a random swath is what I colored in the end, out maybe closer to Spring Green. You can see that this area colored in is 87.1% white, so whiter on average than the whole of Wisconsin. And so you can make those kinds of comparisons, and that can inform your map. The last thing that I'll demonstrate before turning things back over to Liz is the most important thing, which is how to share your map, which is by clicking this share button. And it'll take sometimes a few seconds, and then it'll show up as saved. And then you can either highlight and copy your link, or you can click copy, and then the link will be copied and you can paste it in. So that is how you can submit it to the People's Maps Commission. And it's also how you can share it with friends along the way. I am not going to enter in a tag now, but here's also where you could enter in a tag or event code, say PMC, and then other folks could see your map and maybe be inspired by it, maybe want to do one that complements it, and so on. You can also enter in a team or plan name if you're working with a certain group, but that's optional. And that is all I have. I'm going to stop the screen share. I'm going to thank folks for rolling with the demonstration, and double thank folks who were able to map along the way. And Liz, I will turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, one more. Can I ask folks to react if you were able to follow along and map for yourself for any part of the demonstration? Even if it was just coloring in a little bit, panning around, maybe adding in a little description. Awesome. Awesome. So please, for those of you who were able to do any of that, hit that save button so you're able to continue at one of our workshops. Liz, back over to you for real this time.
Okay. All right, I will share my screen again, and then if I am missing important questions in the chat, please just interrupt me. Let me share. Okay, so just really quickly, if you are submitting a map as testimony, I'm going to turn my video off because it's delayed. But if you are submitting a map, you've been working on your community of interest, this is a really short version of a checklist that we have will be posting on our training resources page. But you want to check that your community story is complete. So that means you've given your community a name, you've marked the boundaries and colored in an area. You have a few landmarks dropped and named with some descriptions. And then, of course, you have that community description in the text box below the community name. Once that's all colored in the map, then you want to share your map. To save it, you click the share, which Heather demonstrated. And then if you want to, you can tag it with PMC. So pins to the public mapping page, where other folks can see it and build off it and create their own map. And then you'll just want to revisit the PMC public page just to make sure that it has been saved. So if after you practice with Districtr and map your own community, you're feeling really confident and you want to go out and collect maps with other people, we kind of imagine that there's a few different roles you can play if you're working with others or an organization to collect maps. So you might be an outreach coordinator, and so you might facilitate a training and spread the word and get folks to show up to talk about their community. You could be the community member, so the person sharing local knowledge of a community. You can be the mapper or note taker, and that's kind of the role that Heather played, having your hand on the mouse and making sure you're capturing what stories people are sharing with you, so you can put them in Districtr. And then you could be the interviewer, the person asking the questions and digging into the community narrative. Some strategies for map collection. These are just suggestions. You might have your own way of collecting maps and gathering maps from folks in your community. But you can draw your own map. You can have a small team of mappers who go out for interviews and just ask people about their COIs and share and save them on Districtr. If you have a mailing list, you can mail everyone and say, let's map this community this week. Where do you think it is? Where are the boundaries? What are some of the important places? Or you can lead a hands-on mapping session to help others draw and submit their COIs. So this is just a quick slide to talk about what we're asking folks to do, and then what our lab will be helping with over the next few months. So if you have a community of interest map that you want to use as testimony, you can submit it to the People's Maps Commission, and you can do that through their website. If you click on the yellow box on the page that says contact the commission, you can run your own training. We have a suggested training agenda that you can download, and we post some of our training resources on our website that everyone is welcome to use or change for their own purposes. And then you can map COIs and recruit others to do the same. And then on our end, our lab, like we already mentioned, throughout May is running Districtr trainings. So if you were using this session, to take notes and learn a little bit more about the tools, you're very welcome to come to one of our Wednesday workshops and work in small groups to finish your map, or join one of the study halls to start working on a map. And we'll be consolidating the maps and narratives, and then producing a final report that shows where communities are and where we saw submissions. But with the last 5 minutes, I think we can just answer questions.
I have
Are there?
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna mention that someone asked about Wisconsin's process of taking the maps as testimonies. If you want to talk more about that.
Yeah. So if you have a map that you have created and want to submit as testimony, then you can do that through the People's Maps Commission website. And if we haven't already posted a link in the chat, we can do that or follow up afterwards and make sure everyone has that link for the submission portal. How many maps have been submitted so far? Heather, do you have the latest update on that?
I don't have the latest update. I'm going to be doing another update towards the end of this month. But a few weeks ago, it was in the 30s. And so we are super hoping that actually by telling y'all that this acts as a great push for y'all to reach out to your networks, come to our workshops, do that outreach work that is so important and so hard to do in a pandemic, to help folks get the skills they need to map. And then for those of y'all who are more computer savvy, who are able to help other folks map communities.
Could you tell us how the commission will be using these maps? What's the end product?
I can only answer that in broad strokes, and maybe I'll turn that back over to you, Liz, or possibly to the commission. But we'll be compiling all of the map submissions, identifying common themes, and then working with folks much more on the computer science and data science end to create example plans that don't split communities that shouldn't be split.
And then I can jump in here if that's okay, Liz and Heather. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Rangel. I proudly serve as the commissioner from the 4th District here in the Milwaukee area. Chair Ford, who's usually our fearless leader who kind of takes those questions, he had to jump out early here. But the commission is planning on using these the submitted maps to inform our map drawing process. We are all volunteers who aren't professional map drawers and who come to this work out of a desire to have fair, transparent, nonpartisan map drawing process. And so actually, you know, we're in the process of identifying more specifically what the actual map drawing process will look like, including how we're going to use the communities of interest that you all identify. But certainly the more submissions we have, the better we're going to be able to ensure that when it comes to the actual map drawing process, we make sure we maintain, whenever possible, communities of interest on top of the other criteria, which I'll just plug to our commission's website. Had just recently published what our draft criteria are in terms of the map drawing process. So I encourage you to look at the website and to look over those criteria. But communities of interest are important to us. And we are excited, but also truthfully, personally, a little bit nervous and intimidated by the process. So the more help we have from you all in terms of submitting as many possible communities of interest maps as you can, the better and easier it will be for us to maintain those communities of interest and keep them in mind when we get to that map drawing process. And if any of the other commissioners want to jump in, feel free. I just kind of I volunteered.
That's a great call to action for folks to submit their maps or join us for a Wednesday session to continue working on them or to finish them up. To answer one of the questions in the chat, yes, I think this is going to be on YouTube. Is that right? So you will be able to watch this again if you want to, watch it at half speed or whatever is helpful. But with that, we are at 8 o'clock. So thank you everyone for joining us. And of course, we hope to see you at a Wednesday or Thursday session.
It did look like there was one question. if
Oh,
there's more
did I
time.
miss one?
Sorry, Liz. Yeah, Terry.
Yes,
did you have
I
a
can
question?
hang out for a couple of minutes afterwards. If people have something to do, they can hop off. But yeah, I can hang out. Did I miss it in the chat?
Ben or Terry?
Oh, okay. Hi, Terry.
Hi, thanks, Liz. Yeah, I just wanted to ask Ben, and you may not know this, but I'm wondering as far as timing is concerned, I know the legislature is going to come up with a map and that this will hopefully be compared with that map. And I'm wondering if we have any idea how quickly the legislature will come out with a map and whether this map will be ready before then or at about the same time so that it can be compared.
Yeah, that's a great question, Terry, and I'm sure it's on everyone's mind. And I by all means don't want to speak for the commission. I do want to encourage you to, if you haven't, on our YouTube and on our website, all of our former hearings are available. In our most recent hearing, we did cover with some expert support some of that timeline. I see Commissioner Phillips has come off mute too, so maybe he can jump in here. But we're going to move expeditiously so that our maps, at least from what I understand, we're going to have a little sense of urgency as well so that those maps are done. But Commissioner Phillips, did you want to jump in as well?
No, not, I mean, you said exactly what I was going to say. We will do it expeditiously. And, you know, if the census data is out by mid-August, we'll jump in and try to have our maps as soon as we can thereafter, which is probably the same timeline as the legislature.
Thanks for that question, Terry. Appreciate it.
One thing that I'll add is that the delay in the census, while frustrating in many ways, is in a few respects gives folks interested in community mapping a leg up in that we'll have now more time than we would have otherwise had to do all of this community mapping, do all of these workshops, do all of this outreach.
That's a really great point. Okay, so like I said, I'm happy to hang out for a couple of minutes and try to answer some remaining questions, but otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
Yeah, and I'll just say thank you so much from the commission standpoint. Again, submit those maps, share with us what your communities are. Really appreciate it, Liz and Heather. Shout out to you and everyone at the lab for doing amazing work. Really appreciate your support and help. And good to see all the other commissioners here as well, and especially the community for sure. So bye, everyone.